Good morning, my friends. Welcome. Once again, it's time for Lighting the Candle, a world that works. And we have, again, another great conversation scheduled today. And we will be deciding what that's going to be here in just a second or two. But I just want to remind everybody, if you're listening for the first time, we have one goal in mind, and we have these conversations among friends. And from time to time, we have guest appearances from other folks that we also know are committed to making this world a better place. We want to bring you access to empowerment. Now, it may sound like a lot to do, but stick with us a little while and let me know if it's working, okay? Definitely looking for feedback on my Facebook page. I am Bill Carell. And with me this morning are my dear friend, Lisa Sheehan, and also my other dear friend, Ken Caputo. As time goes on, you'll get to know these people very well. And today, what I'm interested in talking about is what if we all shared the same ideals? And so to maybe get it a little bit more fine-tuned than that, what if there were some things that we could just agree upon as people, no matter who we are and where we are? First of all, what if we could agree on the same ideals? Several different philosophical writers talk about compasses pointing north, right? And essentially what that means is by agreement in organizations, in communities, cultures, what have you, and then in the world, maybe there are some things that we actually do share as ideals. So how's that for a jumping on point? So we'll pass it over. You can't see this at home, but they're both nodding their head up and down like we got a winner here. So we're going to play with this for a little while. And I'd like to introduce first Lisa. Would you like to say a few words about who you are and what your commitment is and what you do in the world?
My name is Lisa Sheehan. I have been in media my entire working career. My passion project is co-publishing a magazine called Epic, empowering people, inspiring communities, what it stands for, and it's what I stand for too. So we just look for ways to better the lives of people and the planet as we go along.
Excellent. And what if we all shared similar ideals?
Well, it's such an interesting because that on some levels, that would be completely boring if we shared the same ideals. Um, and then, I mean, ideals in itself is a word, that's worth looking into. Um, because I was thinking, I think I mentioned to you before, Bill, the book, The Children's Fire.
Yes.
So it was, and it's basically to look at every decision you make on how it will affect the children of tomorrow, basically. And I know I've heard other philosophies where you go 7 generations out. How will it affect 7 generations out? Um, so I think those ideals that are that powerful and that impactful on the planet and on communities as a whole are good things to look at. But you know, those are lofty ideals.
So interested in a definition?
Sure.
Ideal is satisfying one's conception of what is perfect and most suitable. Existing only in the imagination, desirable or perfect, but not likely to become a reality. So a person or thing regarded as perfect. So I think we all know that we're perfectly imperfect, right?
Yeah,
So
perfect is not achievable.
right. So we're basically talking about something that would be virtually perfect as an ideal. So I'm kind of curious, Ken, in terms of, I liked what Lisa led with. It would be kind of boring if we all shared exactly the same ideals, you know?
That was the first word that leapt to my mind
Yeah.
when you said it. That's exactly the first word. Yeah. So, so what's interesting is I bet you if you dig down deep enough, like from a core perspective, we probably do align pretty well on, just our ideals. I mean, just, yeah, I mean, yes, there are people that, uh, I don't know, they'll live a life where they find value in hurting other humans. But for the most part, I tend to believe that if people are in a good place in their own life, they would choose not to do that.
Yeah.
So, so I wonder if you go deep enough, you are going to find some area of agreement. So then, what it feels like it comes back to is less having, the same ideals and more the way we choose to interpret that, and the balance between the I and the we. So, so for some people, their center of gravity is kind of more towards, if I don't take care of myself and my circle, then someone else is going to do things that could hurt me. And other people are thinking less about themselves and more about the greater good, but there's also a risk in that you get taken advantage of and used and abused, that kind of thing. So there's like this, kind of oscillation, that all you can do is, as best you can, try to achieve some semblance of balance, which is not a static thing, it's a dynamic thing, between, caring for yourself personally while also, trying to focus on the community, So it's just kind of interesting. It's, from a business perspective, which is my passion, it's when you want a balanced ecosystem, a business ecology, it's kind of learning to create dynamics where those things are both addressed. So the individual needs to feel that they're valued and they're paid well and they're cared for, and they also have to recognize when they need to step back a little bit from their own personal needs to meet the needs of the team. And all those things have to come into balance. The customer can't take advantage of the business can't take advantage of the customer, all of that. So, this is like a microcosm of what you're talking about.
Well, yeah, and essentially what you just described doesn't ever exist in reality. Okay, people don't behave in a particular way; they behave the way they behave, and sometimes it works, and sometimes it doesn't work. So when you're ideally, building something for the future, for example, Quester's Way, uh, in your mind's eye and in your intention, getting out of bed every single day, it was probably. Well, I can remember that the whole goal there was to allow people to opt in and work there because they found that it fed them spiritually and physically and mentally. So that said, if people didn't work out there, that wasn't what you were going for. You really were looking to have as many ideas as possible around the business community. And I'm speaking from what I understood in all of our conversations, that it was intended to be a different kind of a place to work, right? Where
Yep.
it really didn't show up as work for everybody. It actually showed up somewhere closer to play and self-expression and, just an opportunity every single day to learn and grow like a weed.
Yeah, and you're right. I mean, it was imperfect, absolutely. One of the things that, from a leadership perspective, we recognized was just create a design that makes it as easy as possible for people to make good choices. And a lot of times, I think the design of systems don't really give you that opportunity for the path of least resistance to be the best choice. The path of least resistance are going to be not so good choices. It's kind of like if you're trying to lose weight and you've got cookies and chips and soda in the house, it's a
Yeah.
lot harder, because it's easy to make the bad choice. It's easy to eat the fast food, but if all you have are prepared healthy meals that you can just grab and consume, it makes it easier to make healthier choices, so it always kind of struck me with Quester's Way, that was part of it. But then the other thing was, the advantage you have in a business is we determined what our values were, and we even designed our fitting room, our vetting system, so that, we're very clear on who would fit with those values. In a country, you don't really get to do that. It's like we had a lot more control over variables, and it was still difficult, to have it work in a balanced way, because people are people,
Well, I'm going to go back to something a really dear friend of mine said once, and that is systems actually produce the product that they're designed to produce.
Mhm.
And you may not like it, but a couple of the things that you said there, if you had a narrow expectation of your vetting process, allowing certain types of people, and would that have in some way been an ideal?
Um, I think the ideal that we were operating under was one of partnership. So like we're thinking in terms of a partnership between the like these kind of three overlapping circles, being the team that operated the business, the community that engaged with the business, and then the service the business provided. So so the ideal was, how do we best create alignment between those things, so that what you end up with is every experience leading to your best day ever, which was our commitment. When they all overlap in the center, that's what you'd get. So I think that was the deeper ideal. And I mean, and again, I think everyone on the planet at their core, if they had their choice, would prefer to have the only moment you have, which is the moment we're in right now, be your best moment ever, be your best day ever. So there can be agreement there. Now it's just how we interpret that, and how we want to apply that in our lives.
And as much as you could wish the best moment ever for someone else, you get no vote on how they actually experience it.
No, you do not.
So we're kind of sneaking around the edges of what does ideal mean, and are there actually ideals in countries? For example, in the United States, do we have ideals as a country?
I think what you said, at the systems that create the end product, exactly how it was determined. And I think that's, what we're discovering now, or people are talking about more, is that's how the country was started, and that's what we got. So as far as the country goes, but then, like you look at some of the monuments, like Statue of Liberty, that to me is a pretty decent ideal.
And it was a gift.
Right.
This was a transference of someone else's ideal into what they thought this fledgling country was all about. And they saw some similarities in, the three, what is it? Equality, liberty, and equality, right? Equalness, liberty, and whatever. But the point is, these are amazing ideals that interpretation by whoever sees that statue for the first time ever. I remember walking through Ellis Island. I don't know if either of you have been there and listened to the headset tour that you can go through, and they recorded, each part of the place where you go through. You're having an experience of folks that got off of a boat and checked into this country through Ellis Island and talked about how they experienced seeing the Lady Liberty the first time, and the people that were dumbstruck after being, on the ocean for, I don't know how long it took back in those days, maybe 3 weeks, a month, whatever it took for them to get over here. And they were talking about how it was just the most beautiful thing they'd ever laid their eyes on, and they had never felt that welcome in their entire life before. So these may or may not have been sentences that were uttered by human beings. However, there are enough people who wrote stories about their experience of seeing the Statue of Liberty the first time. And again, for them, what it represented to them was not a statue. It represented a life that would work. It represented for them this opportunity to be free, So with that in mind, I'm really kind of I'm very impressed by how long it took our founding fathers to, first of all, come up with the Declaration of Independence. These, and then our Constitution. They had really almost knockdown, drag out fights, in writing letters back and forth to each other about what the Constitution should actually include and what they intentionally wanted to leave out. And even still, the main thing that happened was we're, I don't know, 6,000-7,000 miles away from Mother England and getting taxed, like we're getting all the benefits of the rest of the English people. And as a result of that, some people saying, okay, it's really not fair for us because we're helping to support people that are over there. And I don't think we're really a colony all that much anymore. We're actually our own country. So again, they sat down and they said, if this thing were to work, let's see if we can give it a set of rules that would be an experiment, and that hopefully we will have thought of enough things and we will have built in, opportunities to make changes to it as time goes on. And so they finished their Continental Congress, and they finally got finished writing the Constitution. And the story goes that Ben Franklin walked out and he was asked by someone, you guys know this story, right? And the question was, do we have a monarchy or do we have a republic? Two hugely different concepts and ideals in terms of how a country will grow. And reportedly, Ben's answer was a republic, if you can keep it. So the whole idea of living into an ideal, like for instance, when you start on a weight loss program, and as you mentioned before, you know in advance it's going to be a series of choices. However, you don't actually physically have those choices until you're presented with options that either fit or don't fit the ideal. And that said, I'm involved in a process now that's called Noom. I don't know if either of you have heard of this before.
Yep.
And it's a really easy thing. It takes about 9 to 12 minutes every single morning, to go through some brief topics, and they're more or less leaving it up to the individual that's in the process to choose their own foods, but based on what your goals are and your height and your starting weight, and the lifestyle that you live, they give you a budget for calories. And the budget is really like those, finger Chinese things that the more you pull on them, so they keep adding more things in. So first, it's just a total number of calories. Then it's a split of they have these color designations where they're either green, yellow, or red, the foods, and it has to do with their caloric density. So for instance, lettuce, a pound of lettuce, is going to be this big and it's going to fill your stomach. And so it has a very low caloric density. However, an avocado has a greater caloric density. And in order to get like 300 calories of lettuce, you got to eat like a whole head, right? Or more. And eat, one avocado is going to give you about 350 calories. And so that's kind of it. Then they're giving you a split between how many calories are green, how many calories are yellow, and how many calories are red. So you have lots of ways to fail consistently on a daily basis, and then have the opportunity for that to not mean anything to you, and it's all just like research. But I'm in this group with about 50 other people, and it's amazing how trained they are to use the language of failure.
Oh.
I slipped, I had 3 cocktails today and I wasn't planning on having any. And we all know that if somebody likes to eat cookies or, those unhealthy foods, you can build that into your budget and have them once a week or once every 2 or 3 weeks, and the whole idea of, in some so-called diets, you have a cheat day.
Right.
There's something wrong with that mentality. It should be a reward, right? If you accomplish the things that you set out to, and some chocolate ice cream a week from Thursday, if you hit the milestone for weight loss, why not? A healthy life can have everything that's available to you that you actually want. And it's not necessarily going to serve people. Very few people can eat healthy their entire existence. They may go some places where the food choices are just not there. So it's all about, ideals are in our everyday thinking, like even setting up our calendar. When you schedule an appointment, how does that feel for you? That's something you really actually intend to do, right?
Right.
And how frequently are you not able to complete all the things that are in your calendar? And there's choices to be two places at the same time. And what was in the calendar was kind of cool, but you know what? I got this other thing that might be more important to me right this minute. Yeah. So I'll go back and I'll just kind of ask you, when you think about anything, and this is really what we're talking about with the food as well, the notion of it being good or bad, those are words that don't have any use. They're really not useful in the whole idea of planning a life that works for you. The concepts of good and bad. My daughter's here from New Jersey, and they're getting ready to go to the beach. So I'm kind of prattling on here, as my Brit friends would say. But the whole idea is that there are some things that go on and dynamics that go on in our life that we don't pay attention to. They're just there. You know what I'm saying? And oftentimes, the analysis or paralysis of analysis, and when people are choosing not to do something that would be good enough, but they're waiting till they can do it perfect and it never happens, that sort of thing. So if you will be willing, how do we take this to a cultural dynamic? Where do we see ideals that are being implemented or possibly being used in a cultural setting?
I think it may be helpful. It's kind of interesting. I'll use the weight loss as a model for this, and I'm going to go back to, just because I love business, so I think about Jim Collins a lot. The author of Great by Choice and Good to Great. And he talks about, you've got a framework of values, mission, strategy, and tactics, with values being the least movable, the most bedrock, and it progresses, it gets more fluid. Your mission is something that's a little bit more long-term, and it also can change and it can be accomplished and you move on. You don't just keep repeating the same mission. And then strategy is the way that you're applying, what seems best based on the circumstances, how best to achieve that mission as it aligns with your values. And then the tactics are very, very fluid. They're constantly changing. So, so if you think about it, to me, weight loss isn't a value, right? Weight loss might be a mission, but the value might be something like health span. I want to live a quality of life to a certain level. I want to be able to, climb Mount Washington when I'm 90 or whatever. It doesn't matter, or have mental clarity. So that's the value. And like, what is it? Zune would be like
Noom.
Zoom is what we're on. Yeah. So that could be a tactic. So you try it for a while, and and a strategy might be your diet and exercise, and some combination of those things, using Noom as the tactic to achieve that. And your mission could be you've chosen an optimal weight of whatever the poundage is, and now you're just working towards that. You know what I'm saying? So, but in the end, the value is the health span. That's the value. So I think that, if you look at a lot of the discourse as a community, as a country, there's a lot of confusion as to what a value is, as opposed to what strategies and tactics are, which things that worked 300 years ago, 100 years ago, 5 years ago may not be working anymore. So trying to hold on to those things and confusing those as bedrock things that you have to keep doing because they worked once isn't going to create a healthy situation. So you got to separate it out. You know, what are the values that, you know, we've determined, whether you agree or not, this is how we're running our country, you know, based on these values. What's our mission right now? I don't think people even know what that is anymore. Never mind the best strategies and the current tactics based on technology, you know, demographics, all that kind of stuff. So maybe some clarity on what those things are, how they're different would be helpful.
Yeah, and there's no agreement. You know, as you said, you can go from one school district to another school district. They're teaching different curriculum. They don't have the same studies that from district to district. And the really interesting part of it is that we've lived through this for 50 or 60 years. Do you guys remember, Lisa, you may, IPA?
The beer?
No, it was actually the International Phonetic Alphabet.
No.
We're trying to teach that in the school systems. When you look in a dictionary and it has an AE joined together and dots over the top and all that sort of thing, somebody decided that that was going to be an easy way to teach kids, because once they learn to associate the sound with that, because A can be pronounced like 11 different ways in words, but that would make it very definite for them. So they would have 11 different symbols for A, if, you know, carrying this out to the extreme. And so there's always been, you know, this experimentation, you know, up to recently Common Core. In the 90s, I recall, you know, when we were doing all of the neighborhood revitalization stuff, and there was a guru who came out. Are you guys familiar with the term Ebonics?
Oh, yes.
Yep.
So this guy came out and it was floated up the flagpole, and it got so many holes shot in it. The guy, for some reason, he thought if you taught you know, people of color, you know, in their street language in their community, that would make it easier for them to learn, treating them almost like an ESL student, if you will. We're going to speak to them in the language they hear on the street every single day, and then we're going to translate that back to, you know, common English at some point in the future. That didn't get adopted. And even ESL, when you think of all these different things that people put in, as opposed to having the kids just do the hard work of learning whatever subject it is in the first place, does that seem to, you know, the ideal of producing a better quality student that can perform better on tests and whatever that ideal was for education? How's that been working, you know, for us in this country?
I think it served its purpose at the time, but we all know the education system needs a complete overhaul, and how that's going to happen, especially like you talked about, different districts not even doing the same thing within a town or a state. So, you know, to make it countrywide or even statewide would be, you know, to have to start at the ground level and work up. But, you know, you have the magnet schools that I think are trying a little bit, and that kind of thing seems to at least acknowledge the differences between students, their different learning levels, and that kind of approach. But yeah, as far as I think the whole school system needs to incorporate life skills, and you know, we've talked about that before too. It's just missing a lot of things that would behoove people living in this modern tech world that moves too fast.
Yeah, go ahead, Ken.
No, I'm just thinking, why does it have to be such a big freaking deal? You know, it's a tactic. You tested it out, and you know, and I see this. I've been working in schools for decades, and so someone tries something, and if someone else doesn't like what they tried, or the outcome wasn't good, it turns into accountability and blame and recrimination and complaint and stomping about, why it shouldn't have been done and why my way was better and blah, 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 blah. Why not look at it and say, all right, that didn't work the way we expected. Is there any value we can cultivate? How do we utilize that? What can Ebonics teach us? There must have been some valid reason that he had for thinking about that. So, and it maybe if everyone, instead of just beating them over the head about it, which happens with so many people that try to do something new in the entrepreneurial world. Just Henry Ford said it. If I'd asked people what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. Anytime something that's not in our realm, our instinct is to crush it with a rock, So, and it's just, and again, stop taking it so personally, and it feels like that's what happens. And I think part of that, the political realm, it's just because people are trying to gain leverage and power, and they're trying to, curry votes. So, they're going to tell people what they want to hear, not what's best. But it gets very frustrating to me when, it's, and there's few things that frustrate me, but this would be one of them where it's, what if we had permission to test things, and then people helped us determine what went wrong, what went right, hold us accountable if we did something irresponsible, absolutely. But at the same time, if no one got hurt, why not look for the value instead of criticizing all the things that didn't work out about it?
Sure.
And that's, we're not still using an iPhone 1 or a Galaxy 1. They made it and it was amazing. And then they figured out what could be more amazing about it. And they just kept making it better, finding ways to improve it. And, it's not ignoring the things that didn't work, ignoring the complaints, those have value, but the focus isn't on just, you're not still complaining about what the iPhone 1 did or didn't do, because we don't use it anymore. It was a tactic, it was a tool, and we we moved on,
Well,
so,
you used a very important, where it's politics is a 4-letter word, you know what I mean? And unfortunately, there's stupidness with regard to legislation having to do with education and funding and the requirements that are being placed on it. Do you realize that when were the Iowa tests? Those were the ones that we had when we were kids. The whole idea of the Iowa test had nothing to do with the kids ever, not one single time. Mm-hmm. It was meant to test the curriculum and the ability of the teachers to get fundamental concepts across to most of the kids in the class, at least a standard bell curve, right? Then they started using it for placing them in different groups so that they would have different experiences in terms of the types of subjects that they would be taught. Then they were using it in order to kind of decide whether or not they would ever go to college. All of these things, the tool was never intended for that. It had more to do with, are we teaching these kids fundamentals that they can walk away with? And then it all became about memorization. It had absolutely nothing to do with, are we teaching critical thinking? Are they able to reason, between this and that, So then you get the situation where those are now being used in a negative way for the teachers, and they have to have certain criteria met in terms of their average scores. And if they're not achieving that, then they don't, get promoted, they don't get tenure and all this other neat stuff, right? And you want to hear what I consider to be a very stupid thing? Do you realize that in order for a school system to get equal funding from the state and federal government to what they got the prior year, they have to spend all of what they got in the prior year? And if they don't do that, they lose all of it. Now, who was the brain that thought that up? Like that was going to be a good thing?
That was not one person. That was second and third order consequences from years of people laying different strategies and tactics, keep going back to that. And after a while, it's like anyone that built a website from the ground up, eventually you look at it and you have all these different things that are bolted on and you're not even sure how they why it got so complicated and convoluted. It's just time and multiple views and changing situations just create that. But it's interesting because I mean, what you're talking about is really just, they're just design flaws that are inherent in anything that's not fixed. You know, it's a moving dynamic organism, whether it's a school or a community or a government or anything. So, you know, and it's just, you know, what I see a lot right now is people complaining about what got us here or doomsaying about where it's going to take us. And it's just really, really hard to step back and think, all right, you know, what are we actually trying to do? Like, you know, I mean, multiple choice is a good example.
Sure.
You know, multiple choice was originally something that was designed to just quickly sort mass amounts of immigrants coming into the country into the ones who had some facility with English and ones who didn't.
Right.
And it just stayed way past its time. But it's not useless. You know, there's still value in the multiple choice format.
Yes.
It's just sometimes you need to rethink it. And if it's being used more than it should, and it's actually starting to you know, cause a regression in critical thinking skills, or it's being used in some way, well, then we just need to redesign it so it's being used appropriate. But you don't hear that conversation. You hear, we have to have it, or it's bad, we have to get rid of it. It's all either or, absolute. There's no both and. There's no curiosity about, you know, how this tool that served us so well could serve how we're different from what we were back then. Why do you have to throw it out, or why do you have to double down on it?
Sure.
It's, you know, so, but those are, you know, like you said, the problem is those are they're difficult conversations to have because it requires an open mind and a willing heart, you know, and if those two things don't come together, you end up with, you know, just obstacles and roadblocks and all that kind of stuff, resistance.
Well, there's clearly a difference, Lisa, between a free market system where people vote with their cash, you know, with an iPhone, or they vote with their cash without any choice in terms of taxation and government spending of money, and then dictating how the school systems will do certain things. And we've seen a huge fight against people having the discretion to go to different kinds of schools, right? Magnet schools, charter schools, all the rest of this sort of thing. And when you get down to it and you look very carefully, in the inner cities, are there many charter schools and magnet schools there? We gotta have somebody on that can talk about that. You know what I'm saying? That has firsthand experience.
Yeah, and it does change from state to state too, because there's, you know, that part of it as well.
Sure, Lisa.
I have to go. I'm sorry.
Oh. All right. Well, we're getting to the end here anyway. And any closing thoughts for you?
The only things that came to mind was like to ask the perpetual questions. Like, you know, before it used to, well, one of the good ones is why, you know, to the, like, again, to the seventh why, or, you know, but after hearing Ken, it was like, then how, you know, ask that, keep asking that, you know, within whatever, however, wherever two or more are gathered.
Yes. Better questions. Ken, any wrap up?
No, I think that's, I agree with the how, and remaining curious about someone else's how and the value in it, instead of how it's different from your how. Mm-hmm. You know, it's like, what's the value in someone else? How can I borrow brilliance? How can we create an alchemical reaction where two things come together and make something that neither of us could have done individually?
Yes.
You know, a little more of that would be an interesting conversation. Actually, it's happening. It's just, you just got to know where to look for it.
Well, one of the things that we learned from Deming, who went to Japan and taught them, you know, statistical quality control and got their manufacturing under control, was shamelessly steal the best ideas. Why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah.
So we have been having a great conversation about lighting the candle in a world that works. And so Thank you both for your participation, and thank you at home for listening in on us. And we'll look to see you again next week. Until then, light a candle and make the world work, right?
Correct.
So long. Thank you so much.
Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, A World That Works, part of the Exvadio Podcast Network. You can hear us at exvadio.com/podcasts, Apple Podcasts app, Google Play, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and wherever you find podcasts.